David, a 35-year-old manager, had been working at a major tech company for over a decade. He was respected for his work ethic, leadership skills, and unwavering dedication. Each day in the office was a testament to his passion for his job, where he deeply engaged with his team, developing innovative projects and ensuring deadlines were met. One morning, noticing that one of his employees, Rachel, was struggling with her tasks, David decided to approach her. "Rachel, could you come to my office for a moment? We need to talk about your performance," he said in a tone that aimed to be both firm and understanding. He wanted to address the issue privately to avoid embarrassing her in front of her colleagues. Rachel seemed nervous but agreed. As they entered the meeting room, David tried to be direct yet empathetic. "I've noticed you're having trouble meeting deadlines. Is there anything we can do to help? Anything specific that's making your work difficult?" He hoped the conversation would be productive, identifying problems and working together to solve them. However, the tension in the room was palpable. Rachel avoided eye contact and gave vague responses. "I'm dealing with some personal issues, but I'll try to improve," she said, seemingly relieved when the meeting finally ended. David felt he had done his best to offer support, believing the situation could improve. But that afternoon, the office atmosphere changed drastically. David was called to the HR director's office. "David, we need to discuss a serious accusation," the director said with a severe and worried tone. David, confused, followed the director to a conference room where he was informed that Rachel had accused him of sexual harassment. This can't be true, he thought, feeling the ground fall out from under him. Before he could defend himself, David was escorted out of the building by security. His colleagues' looks were of shock and judgment. "I didn't do anything wrong," he repeated to himself, incredulous. The walk to the parking lot seemed endless. Each step was heavy, laden with humiliation and despair. How could he prove his innocence when everyone around him seemed to have already condemned him? At home, the situation didn't improve. Calls from colleagues and friends stopped, and he began to feel the weight of distrust. "Do they believe her?" he thought, while trying in vain to explain the situation to his wife, Lisa, who was equally shocked and confused. "We'll get through this together," she promised, but David felt isolated and betrayed by a system that seemed to have turned against him for no reason. The following days were filled with anxiety. David couldn't sleep, his mind racing with unanswered questions. He replayed every detail of the conversation with Rachel, trying to understand how a simple performance review could have turned into such a serious accusation. Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? He constantly questioned himself. How will this accusation impact David's life? Keep watching to find out. If you like following stories, reports, and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. David was at home, in a mix of shock and anger, when he received the official news of his suspension. The email, cold and impersonal, informed him that he would be suspended until a full investigation was conducted. There were no details about the allegations, just a brief note saying, "You will be contacted soon with more information." David felt a wave of indignation. "How can they suspend me without even hearing my side?" he thought, reading and rereading the few lines of the email. The following days were a nightmare. David tried to understand how his life had unraveled so quickly. He called the HR department, but the response was always the same: "We are conducting the investigation. We cannot provide more information at this time." He felt powerless and isolated. His wife, Lisa, tried to comfort him, but the uncertainty and anxiety grew each day. One morning, David tried to access his work email to see if there were any updates. To his horror, he discovered that his password had been changed and his account deactivated. "They've completely cut me off," he thought, with a lump in his throat. Without access to his email, he couldn't follow the investigation or defend himself adequately. He felt like a prisoner, awaiting a sentence without even knowing what he was accused of. Lisa suggested he contact a lawyer. "We need professional help, David. We can't face this alone." Reluctantly, he agreed. The lawyer, an experienced man named Thomas, listened patiently to the whole story. "This is a very serious accusation, David. We need to find out exactly what you are being accused of and what evidence there is against you," Thomas said, taking meticulous notes. David spent most of his time at home, mentally revisiting the meeting with Rachel. Every word, every gesture, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. How could this happen? He questioned himself. He began to doubt himself, looking for possible mistakes. Lisa often found him sitting alone, staring into space. Let's go out for a bit, get some fresh air, she suggested, trying to lighten the weight he carried. During one of these outings, they ran into Michael, an old friend of David who worked in the company's IT department. I heard what happened, David. This is crazy, Michael said, clearly concerned. David explained the situation in detail, hoping Michael could offer some hope. Let me see what I can do. Maybe there's something in the system that can help prove your innocence. The following days were a mix of hope and despair. David awaited news from Michael while dealing with the anxiety of the investigation. Finally, one night Michael called. David, I found something. There's a camera in the meeting room where you met with Rachel. Maybe this can help. This revelation was a ray of hope in the darkness. Can you access the footage? David asked, a mix of anxiety and relief. Michael promised to do his best, but warned it could be complicated. I need to be discreet. I don't want him to find out I'm helping you, he explained. While waiting for news from Michael, David tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Lisa was his pillar, keeping the house running and offering unconditional support. We'll get through this together, she said tirelessly. However, the growing pressure was starting to affect even Lisa, who tried to hide her own anxieties to avoid burdening David. Will the investigation reveal the truth? Don't miss the next chapter. David could barely sleep, the anxiety eating away at him like acid. He clung to the hope that Michael would find something to prove his innocence. A week after the revelation about the camera, Michael finally managed to access the footage and arranged a secret meeting with David at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. When David arrived, he found Michael already seated, a laptop open on the table. David, I got the footage. You need to see this, Michael said, his voice low but urgent. David sat down, his heart pounding in his chest, as Michael clicked on the video file. The screen showed the meeting room, the image clear, capturing every movement and expression. The meeting began normally. David could see himself entering the room, followed by Rachel. He motioned for her to sit, and then began discussing her performance. Everything seemed so ordinary, so professional. He looked at the screen, reliving that moment with a new perspective, now aware of the accusations that followed. There was no inappropriate gesture, no insinuation, just a serious conversation about work. Rachel was visibly nervous in the video, but David hadn't noticed anything unusual at the time. Michael paused the video at several points, highlighting the neutrality of David's interactions. You did nothing wrong, David. This proves your innocence, Michael said firmly. David felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. Why would she do this? He murmured, more to himself than to Michael. With the evidence in hand, David felt a renewed determination. He immediately scheduled a meeting with his lawyer, Thomas, to discuss the next step. Thomas watched the video in silence, his face impassive. This is exactly what we needed. Let's schedule a conference with the company and present this evidence, he finally said, a determined gleam in his eyes. Meanwhile, David continued to face isolation and frustration. He wanted justice to be served, but he also wanted to understand why Rachel would make such a devastating accusation. The wait for the conference with the company was excruciating. Each day felt like an eternity, each night a battle against insomnia. Finally, the day of the conference arrived. David, accompanied by Thomas, joined the video call with the company's CEO and HR representatives. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone settled in. Thank you for joining us, David. We want to discuss your current situation, the CEO began, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Thomas took the floor, calmly presenting the footage as evidence. This recording clearly shows that David did nothing inappropriate during the meeting with Rachel. The accusation is baseless, he stated. The company representatives watched the video in silence, their faces growing more serious as the video progressed. When the video ended, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. The CEO cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. We were unaware of this footage's existence, he admitted. Clearly, a serious mistake has been made. They offered David a friendly termination, payment for the suspension period, and a good reference, but David was determined to seek more justice. This is not enough. My reputation has been tarnished, and I lost my job unjustly. I demand Rachel's termination and my reinstatement, or a year's salary as compensation, David demanded, his voice firm and unwavering. The company tried to argue, but David was prepared to fight for his rights. The conference ended without a clear agreement, leaving David even more determined to seek justice. He knew the battle was just beginning, but now he had evidence on his side and a determined lawyer by his side. The next phase would be crucial in clearing his name and restoring his life. Will the footage be enough to exonerate David? Keep watching to find out. David felt a whirlwind of emotions as he awaited the HR conference. He knew his career and reputation were on the line. Thomas, his lawyer, was by his side, calmly reviewing the key points they would present. David's anxiety was palpable, but he knew he had to stay calm and composed to face what was coming next. When the call connected, the virtual room filled with familiar faces and some new HR figures. David's boss, Mr. Johnson, was there, as well as the head of HR, Ms. Brown, and several other company executives. The initial silence was almost deafening, loaded with the tension of the moment. "Thank you for being here," Mr. Johnson began, trying to sound conciliatory. "We understand that there are some very serious issues to discuss." He looked at Thomas, signaling for him to start. Thomas nodded and, in a firm and clear voice, began to lay out David's case. "We have crucial evidence that was not considered in the initial investigation. This security footage shows the entire meeting between David and Rachel. You will see that at no point did David behave inappropriately." He then shared the screen, displaying the meeting footage. The virtual room was silent as everyone watched. The recording showed David conducting the meeting professionally, with no sign of harassment or inappropriate behavior. Rachel seemed nervous, but that was understandable in a performance review. When the video ended, Thomas spoke again. "As you can see, Rachel's accusation is completely unfounded. This evidence should be sufficient to clear David of all charges and reinstate him to his previous position, with all appropriate compensation for the time and suffering the situation has caused." Ms. Brown, the head of HR, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, I was not aware of this footage's existence. It seems there was a serious flaw in our initial investigation." Mr. Johnson appeared visibly concerned. "David, we want to resolve this fairly. We acknowledge the mistake was made and would like to offer a friendly termination, including payment for the suspension period and a good reference." David, however, was prepared. "That is not enough. My reputation has been tarnished, and I lost my job unjustly. I demand Rachel's termination and my reinstatement, or a year's salary as compensation. Additionally, I want a public apology." The executives exchanged nervous glances. "David, we understand your frustration, but we need to consider the legal limitations," said Ms. Brown, trying to stay calm. "You signed an arbitration agreement when you were hired, which limits your legal options." Thomas quickly intervened. "The signing of an arbitration agreement does not nullify my client's right to justice, especially in cases of defamation and unjust termination based on false accusations. We are prepared to challenge the validity of this agreement in court if necessary." The virtual room fell silent for a few moments. Finally, Mr. Johnson spoke again. "We need some time to consider all legal options and revisit this case with our legal advisors. Can we schedule another meeting in a few days to discuss a more appropriate resolution?" David agreed, knowing the battle was far from over, but feeling more confident with the evidence on his side. He ended the call, feeling a mix of relief and tension. The fight for justice continued, but he was determined to clear his name and rebuild his career. In the days that followed, the company reviewed the footage and the arguments presented by David and Thomas. The tension was palpable as everyone awaited the final response. David maintained constant contact with Thomas, preparing for any eventuality. Finally, a new conference was scheduled. This time, there was a more conciliatory tone in the virtual room. "David, after a thorough review, we acknowledge the error we made. We are willing to offer a fairer settlement, including your immediate reinstatement, a year's salary as compensation, and a public apology. Rachel will be terminated for cause." David felt a wave of relief and victory. He looked at Thomas, who nodded, indicating it was a good offer. "I accept the proposal," David said, finally feeling that justice was being served. Will David accept the offer or fight for more justice? Don't miss the next chapter. David was far from satisfied with the company's offer. The injustice he had suffered, the humiliation of being escorted out of his workplace, and the stain on his reputation were still fresh wounds. Although the offer included reinstatement, an apology, and Rachel's dismissal, he felt it wasn't enough to repair the damage. Thomas, his lawyer, agreed. "David, you have the right to demand more. This company not only failed to protect your rights, but also conducted an unfair investigation. They need to understand that such actions have consequences." David decided he would reject the initial offer and fight for something more substantial. He wanted to ensure that Rachel and anyone involved in manipulating the accusations faced appropriate consequences. He also wanted financial compensation that reflected the impact on his professional and personal life. During the new conference with the company's executives and HR, David, with Thomas by his side, presented his new demands. I reject the offer that was made. I demand not only Rachel's termination, but also significant financial compensation that covers all the damages this situation has caused to my career and reputation. I want a year's salary as compensation, and I will accept nothing less. The executives were visibly tense. David, we understand your frustration, but we need to consider the legal limitations, Mr. Johnson said. You signed an arbitration agreement when you were hired, which limits your legal options. Thomas quickly intervened. The signing of an arbitration agreement does not nullify my client's right to justice, especially in cases of defamation and unjust termination based on false accusations. We are prepared to challenge the validity of this agreement in court if necessary. The virtual room fell silent for a few moments. Finally, Mr. Johnson spoke again. We need some time to consider all legal options and revisit this case with our legal advisors. Can we schedule another meeting in a few days to discuss a more appropriate resolution? David agreed, knowing the battle was far from over, but feeling more confident with the evidence on his side. He ended the call, feeling a mix of relief and tension. The fight for justice continued, but he was determined to clear his name and rebuild his career. In the days that followed, the company reviewed the footage and the arguments presented by David and Thomas. The tension was palpable as everyone awaited the final response. David maintained constant contact with Thomas, preparing for any eventuality. Finally, a new conference was scheduled. This time, there was a more conciliatory tone in the virtual room. David, after a thorough review, we acknowledge the error we made. We are willing to offer a fairer settlement, including your immediate reinstatement, a year's salary as compensation, and a public apology. Rachel will be terminated for cause. David felt a wave of relief and victory. He looked at Thomas, who nodded, indicating it was a good offer. I accept the proposal, David said, finally feeling that justice was being served. Will David accept the offer or fight for more justice? Don't miss the next chapter. David breathed a sigh of relief after the difficult negotiation with his former company. However, the impact of the false accusations still resonated in his life. Determined to start anew, he began looking for new job opportunities. With his skills and experience, he soon found a promising position at a renowned company. The interview went excellently, and he felt a new chapter was opening. The days following the interview were filled with anticipation. David envisioned himself starting over, leaving behind the recent past ghosts. When he received the response email, his heart raced. But upon opening the message, the disappointment was crushing. The company had decided not to move forward with his application, citing unfavorable references. Confused and devastated, David contacted the recruiter for more details. He was informed, indirectly, that his former company had given a negative reference. The sense of being betrayed again filled his heart with frustration and anger. Determined to clarify the situation, David sought out his lawyer, Thomas, once more. They continue to sabotage my life, even after all the agreements and promises, David vented, while Thomas listened attentively. This is defamation, Thomas. I can't allow them to destroy my reputation like this. Thomas agreed and suggested confronting the company directly about this defamation. Let's schedule a new conference with HR and their lawyers. They need to understand they are treading on dangerous ground by continuing with these negative references. David and Thomas organized the conference, and the tone of this meeting was even more tense than the last. David, holding his phone with a call in progress, felt every muscle in his body tense as they waited for the company representatives to join the call. Mr. Johnson, we've received information that your company provided an unfavorable reference about David, resulting in the loss of a new job opportunity. This is unacceptable, Thomas began, directly addressing the issue. Mr. Johnson seemed surprised. We have no knowledge of any negative reference given by our team. If this happened, it was a mistake and will be investigated. David wasn't convinced. This has gone too far. I demand a full investigation and an immediate correction. I want a written statement that the reference was a mistake and that my qualifications are recognized without any blemish. Ms. Brown, trying to keep the situation under control, added, We take this very seriously. We assure you that an investigation will be conducted, and any errors will be corrected. We apologize for any inconvenience this has caused. The tension in the call was palpable. David knew he needed to stand firm. This is not just a matter of apologies. My career is at stake. I need assurances that this will not happen again. The executives promised a swift response, and the call ended. The following days were filled with anxious waiting for David. He knew the company was under pressure, but he was not willing to relent until his reputation was fully restored. Finally, he received a formal email from the company. They confirmed that a negative reference had been given by mistake and assured that all future references would be positive. Additionally, they sent a formal letter of recommendation highlighting his skills and achievements. Although this was a small victory, the damage had already been done. The opportunity he had lost could not be regained. David decided it was time to adopt a new approach. Instead of solely focusing on finding a new job, he began to consider the possibility of starting his own business. The experience with his former company and the support of Thomas inspired him to be his own boss, where he could ensure that justice and ethics were the pillars of his company. Meanwhile, David also took care of the legal side. Thomas filed a defamation lawsuit against the company, demanding compensation for the damage to his reputation and career. The legal battle was far from over, but David was more determined than ever to fight for his dignity. Will the company admit its mistake and compensate David? Don't miss the next chapter. During the ongoing investigation, David discovered something even more disturbing. Rachel had been encouraged by Karen, department manager, to make the false accusation. Karen has a history of manipulation and wanted to get me out of the way, revealed Michael, who found incriminating emails during his investigation. Karen had also attempted to destroy the footage that exonerated David but failed. This is pure corruption, David thought. With this new information, he and his lawyer were ready to confront the company again. We have proof that the accusation was manipulated from the start, the lawyer told HR. The company had no choice but to take the new evidence seriously. This is a serious revelation. We need to take action, admitted David's boss, his voice grave. The truth was finally starting to come out. Will the truth about the evidence manipulation be revealed? Keep watching to find out. David decided to initiate a civil lawsuit against the company and Rachel for defamation and wrongful termination. We'll fight this to the end, he told his lawyer. The legal action was a significant step toward restoring his reputation and seeking justice. During the trial, Rachel, under pressure, finally admitted that she had lied after being coerced by Karen. I was afraid of losing my job. Karen said that if I didn't do it, she would find another way to harm me, Rachel confessed in her testimony. Rachel's admission of guilt was a pivotal moment in David's case. This proves everything we've said, David's lawyer stated. The fight for justice was nearing a resolution. Will David receive justice in court? Keep watching to find out. With Rachel's admission and the evidence of manipulation, the company was forced to take drastic measures. Rachel and Karen were fired for cause. We cannot tolerate this kind of behavior, declared the CEO in an internal statement. The company also offered David his job back with a salary increase, back pay for the suspension period, and a public apology. We want to correct our mistakes and restore your position in the company, David's boss said. David felt vindicated but was still undecided. Should I accept and try to start over here or move on for good, he pondered. The decision was not easy, but he knew that either choice would be a new beginning. Will David accept the offer or continue the legal fight? Don't miss the next chapter. After much reflection, David decided to accept the company's offer and return to his job with all agreed-upon conditions. I want to show that I can overcome this and move forward, he decided. Returning to work was emotional, but also challenging. Colleagues received him with a mix of support and curiosity. David reflected on the entire journey. It was a tough battle, but my integrity was recognized. Now it's time to rebuild and plan for a better future, he thought. With a renewed sense of purpose and justice, David planned his future, knowing he had overcome one of the greatest adversities of his life. What will the new chapter of David's life be like? Keep watching for more inspiring stories. If you like following stories, reports, and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.